The Galactic Military Academy on Station Kepler-V7 was, without question, the most prestigious combat training facility in the known universe. Well, at least that is what Cadet Zorthak told himself every morning while polishing his 4 arms to their usual intimidating shine. The massive orbital platform hung in space like a metallic moon, bristling with defensive arrays and training facilities that could simulate combat conditions from 1,000 different worlds. Zorthak strutted through the main corridor, his purple-scaled hide gleaming under the artificial lights, each of his 4 muscular arms swinging with practiced arrogance. As a Regalian from the warrior clans of Sigma 9, he knew weapons. Oh, how he knew weapons. Plasma rifles, ion cannons, molecular disintegrators, if it could vaporize, obliterate, or generally ruin someone's day. Zorthak had mastered it, or so he believed. Another glorious day to demonstrate superiority, he announced to no one in particular, his voice carrying that special blend of confidence and irritation that only comes from being absolutely convinced you are better than everyone else. Cadet Blixara, a tentacled being from the Vega system, slithered past him with an exasperated ripple of her translucent skin. Her dozen writhing appendages carried various data tablets, while her large, intelligent eyes rolled in their sockets. "Oh, wonderful," she muttered, her translator giving her voice a perpetually sarcastic tone. "Zorthak is feeling chatty today." Behind them, Cadet Grummet rumbled along the corridor, each step of his rock-like form sending tiny vibrations through the deck plating. The living boulder from the Titan Belt mining colonies rarely spoke, but when he did, his words carried the weight of shifting continents. "Competition today," he stated in his grinding bass voice. "Weapons demonstration." Zorthak's eyes, all 6 of them, lit up with predatory glee. Ah yes, the annual weapon demonstration competition. Finally, a chance to show these academy instructors what real firepower looks like. He flexed all 4 arms simultaneously, a move he had practiced extensively in front of mirrors. The 3 cadets entered the massive demonstration hall, where Commander Tom Marley stood at attention on the central platform. The human instructor was unremarkable by galactic standards. 2 arms, 2 legs, single head, the usual boring bipedal arrangement. What made him noteworthy was his reputation for being absolutely ruthless in combat assessments. "Cadets," Marley's voice boomed across the chamber. "Today marks the 73rd annual interspecies weapon demonstration competition. Each of you will present your civilization's finest portable combat technology. Accuracy, destructive capability, and tactical effectiveness will be judged." Around the hall, various alien cadets began unpacking their weapons with reverent care. The Andromedan delegation assembled something that looked like a miniature star, crackling with contained fusion energy. The Centauri representatives hefted gravity hammers that made space itself ripple with potential violence. Even the peaceful plant beings from Kepler-22b had brought some sort of spore launcher that reeked of biological warfare. Zorthak grinned, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. His own weapon, a quad-barrel iron destroyer, from the Regalian military arsenal, hummed with barely contained electromagnetic fury. "Look at all these impressive displays of technological advancement," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Truly, we represent the finest military minds in the galaxy." That was when she walked in. Amy Kowalski, according to her identification badge, representing something called Earth. She looked even more unremarkable than Commander Marley. Average height, brown hair, 2 perfectly ordinary human arms. But what made every alien cadet in the room suddenly stop and stare was not her appearance. It was her weapon, or rather what appeared to be the complete absence of any weapon worthy of the name. Amy carried a small dark object roughly the size of a Regalian fist. It had a handle, and what might generously be called a barrel, though it was so narrow that Zorthak wondered if it could even fit a proper energy cell. There were no glowing power indicators, no crackling energy fields, no ominous humming sounds that indicated serious destructive potential. The silence in the hall lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the laughter began. Zorthak started it, naturally. His booming guffaws echoed off the chamber walls as he pointed at Amy with all four arms. That is what humans consider military hardware. He doubled over, clutching his sides. By the moons of Rigel, I have seen children's toys more intimidating. Blixara's tentacles writhed with amusement. Perhaps she forgot her real weapon, and brought her what do humans call it a paperweight instead. Even Gromit, whose species was known for stoic composure, let out what passed for a chuckle among living rocks. Very small, he rumbled. Very, very small. The laughter spread through the hall like a contagion. Cadets from dozens of species pointed, wheezed, and made jokes in languages that their translators struggled to render into galactic standard. Amy Kowalski stood calmly in the center of it all, her small weapon held loosely at her side, waiting for the mockery to die down. Commander Marley raised his hand for silence, though Zorthak noticed even he seemed to be fighting back a smirk. Very well, cadets. Let us see what each species has brought to demonstrate. Zorthak could barely contain his excitement. This was going to be even more entertaining than he had hoped. The weapons display that followed was nothing short of magnificent, at least in Zorthak's extremely biased opinion. The Andromedan cadet, whose name was some unpronounceable series of musical tones, hefted his plasma cannon with reverent care. The weapon stood nearly as tall as its wielder, crackling with contained stellar fire that made the air shimmer with heat distortion. Energy conduits ran along its length like glowing veins, pulsing with barely restrained nuclear fury. Behold, the Andromedan announced proudly, the Mark IV stellar incinerator, capable of generating temperatures equivalent to a star's corona. It can melt through 6 meters of reinforced battle steel in under 2 seconds. Zorthak nodded approvingly. Now that was what a proper weapon looked like. Massive, intimidating and absolutely guaranteed to leave nothing but superheated plasma, where your enemies used to be. Cadet Blixara unfurled her tentacles around her own contribution, a sleek, crystalline device that hummed with molecular resonance. The vegan molecular disruptor, she announced with typical scientific precision. It destabilizes atomic bonds at the quantum level. Targets simply cease to exist. Very clean, very efficient, very final. Oh, how wonderfully advanced. Zorthak called out, his voice dripping with genuine admiration mixed with theatrical sarcasm, directed toward Amy. Weapons that actually understand the fundamental forces of the universe. Not like some species that still think banging rocks together counts as military technology. The human representative continued to stand quietly, occasionally checking something on her small device that definitely, absolutely could not possibly be called a weapon by anyone with functioning optical organs. Gromit stepped forward next, his massive frame casting shadows across the demonstration platform. In his boulder-like hands, he carried what appeared to be a warhammer forged from compressed neutron star material. The weapon's head warped space itself, creating visible gravitational lensing effects around its surface. Seismic devastator, Gromit rumbled in his grinding bass voice, manipulates local gravity fields. Strike ground once, earthquake follows. Strike twice, tectonic plates shift. Strike 3 times. He paused dramatically. Continent splits. The hall erupted in appreciative murmurs and respectful gasps. Zorthak felt a warm glow of species pride spreading through his 4-chambered heart. This was civilized warfare. These were weapons worthy of the name. Truly inspiring displays of technological mastery, he announced loudly, making sure Amy could hear every word. It is so refreshing to see species that have moved beyond primitive chemical propulsion and kinetic projectiles. I mean, can you imagine still using such what is the term Stone Age methods in this modern era? Several other cadets joined in the ridicule with enthusiasm. The reptilian Dracorian representative hissed in amusement. Perhaps the human brought a slingshot as backup. The insectoid hive mind collective chittered in harmonic mockery. Or maybe a sharp stick. Very advanced sharp stick, surely. Amy Kowalski, throughout this entire display of galactic superiority, remained completely unperturbed. She examined her small device with the calm professionalism of someone checking a chronometer for the correct time. Occasionally she would tilt it slightly toward the light, as if inspecting its surface for minor imperfections. Commander Marley, meanwhile, was making a valiant effort to maintain instructional dignity while clearly struggling not to join the widespread amusement. His human features kept twitching in what Zorthak suspected might be suppressed laughter. Even the Academy's supposedly neutral instructors could recognize inferior technology when they saw it. "All right, cadets," Marley called out, his voice carrying just a hint of what might charitably be called anticipation. "Let us proceed to the testing range for practical demonstrations." The massive chamber's far wall iris opened to reveal the Academy's premier weapons testing facility. Multiple target arrays stretched across a range that extended for several kilometers into the station's superstructure. Reinforced battle steel barriers, energy-absorbing panels, and gravitometric dampening fields created obstacles that could challenge even the most advanced military hardware. Target drones buzzed through the air in complex patterns. Armored plates of varying thickness and composition stood ready to test penetration capabilities. Mobile barriers tested accuracy under adverse conditions. The entire setup represented the finest defensive technology the galaxy had to offer. Zorthak rubbed his hands together with glee. All four of them. "Oh, this is going to be spectacular. I cannot wait to see what Earth's mighty pea-shooter accomplishes against actual military-grade defenses." Amy continued her quiet preparation, checking her weapon's small mechanisms with the methodical care of a maintenance technician. She showed no signs of nervousness, embarrassment, or the dawning realization that she was about to humiliate her entire species in front of the galaxy's premier military academy. "Perhaps," suggested Blixara with barely contained glee, "we should warn the target range operators to set the sensors to their lowest possible settings. We would not want to miss such a subtle demonstration of human firepower." The laughter that followed was so loud that it activated the chamber's acoustic dampening systems. What followed could only be described as a symphony of destruction, and Zorthak had front-row seats to the greatest show in the galaxy. Commander Marley stepped up to the range control console, his fingers dancing across holographic displays as target systems came online with mechanical precision. "Cadets will demonstrate in alphabetical order by species designation," Marley announced. "Andromedan delegation, you are first." The musical-toned cadet stepped forward with his stellar incinerator, the massive weapon humming with barely contained nuclear fire. Energy readings on the range displays immediately spiked into the red zones. Safety barriers engaged automatically, recognizing the potential for catastrophic damage. "Target Array Alpha 7, reinforced battle steel composite thickness 2.3 meters, Marley called out. The Andromedan cadet took careful aim, his weapon's targeting systems painting laser guides across the range. Then he pulled the trigger. The result was absolutely magnificent. A lance of superheated plasma erupted from the cannon's barrel, crossing the range in a brilliant streak of stellar fire. Where it struck the reinforced barrier, metal simply ceased to exist. The beam punched through the steel like it was made of compressed vapor, leaving a perfectly circular hole with edges that glowed white-hot for several minutes afterward. "Penetration successful," Marley reported with professional calm. "Time to breach, 0.8 seconds. Residual thermal signature approaching solar surface temperatures." The crowd erupted in appreciative cheers. Zorthak applauded enthusiastically with all four arms. Now that was how civilized species conducted warfare. With style, with power, with enough energy output to illuminate small moons. "Vegan delegation, you are next," Marley called. Blixara slithered forward, her tentacles coiling around her molecular disruptor with practiced ease. The crystalline weapon caught the range lights and refracted them into rainbow patterns that danced across her translucent skin. She selected a different target, a series of composite armor plates arranged in overlapping layers. "Observe," she said with scientific pride, "the elegant efficiency of quantum-level destruction." Her weapon emitted no visible beam, no dramatic energy discharge, no impressive light show whatsoever. Instead, the target simply stopped being there. One moment, Several tons of advanced armor plating occupied a specific location in space. The next moment, that location contained nothing but empty air and a few scattered atoms that the range sensors could barely detect. Complete molecular dissolution, Marley reported, consulting his instruments with what Zorthak thought might be professional jealousy. Target mass converted to component atoms in 1.2 seconds. No residual energy signature detected. More cheers, more applause. Zorthak was practically vibrating with excitement. Each demonstration proved what every civilized being already knew, that advanced species had moved far beyond crude, primitive methods of inflicting damage upon their enemies. Titan Belt Mining Collective, proceed, Marley announced. Gromit stepped up to the firing line, his massive form casting shadows across the range control systems. His gravitometric hammer seemed to bend light around itself, creating visual distortions that made Zorthak's eyes water when he tried to focus on it directly. The living boulder selected the largest available target, a reinforced bunker structure, designed to withstand orbital bombardment. He hefted his weapon with surprising grace for someone made entirely of compressed rock and exotic minerals. One strike, Gromit rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. Watch. He brought the hammer down in a devastating overhead swing. The weapon never actually touched the target. It struck the range floor approximately 50 meters away from the bunker. But the effect was immediate and spectacular. The entire testing range shuddered as gravitational waves rippled outward from the impact point. The floor buckled and cracked in expanding circles. The reinforced bunker, designed to withstand direct hits from capital ship weapons, simply crumbled as local gravity fields fluctuated wildly around it. What had been a fortress became a pile of twisted metal and rubble in less than 5 seconds. Seismic displacement successful, Marley reported, his voice slightly strained as he watched damage assessment readings climb into ranges that would normally require evacuation protocols. Secondary gravitational effects detected up to 2 kilometers from impact point. Structural integrity of target reduced to well, effectively zero. The cheering this time was mixed with nervous laughter. Even by Academy standards, that level of destructive capability was genuinely impressive. Finally, it was Zorthak's turn. He stepped forward with all the confidence of someone who absolutely positively knew he was about to steal the show. His quad-barrel ion destroyer powered up with a sound like an approaching thunderstorm, electromagnetic coils spinning to operational frequencies that made the air itself crackle with static electricity. Multiple target engagement, he announced proudly, selecting an array of mobile drones, armored barriers, and sensor posts scattered across the range. Observe Regalian military precision. All 4 barrels of his weapon synchronized their targeting systems, painting the entire range with overlapping fields of electromagnetic detection. Then, with theatrical flair that he had been practicing for weeks, Zorthak opened fire. The ion destroyer lived up to its name spectacularly. 4 streams of charged particles lanced across the range simultaneously, each one guided by independent targeting computers and powered by enough energy to light up a small city. Targets exploded, vaporized or simply disintegrated under the coordinated barrage. The light show was absolutely magnificent, crackling energy, brilliant explosions, and the satisfying sounds of expensive military hardware being reduced to component atoms. Multiple target elimination successful, Marley reported, consulting readings that showed impressive destruction across 17 separate target systems. Time to complete engagement, 3.7 seconds. Accuracy rating 94%. Energy expenditure equivalent to a small tactical nuclear device. Zorthak took a bow, all 4 arms spread wide to acknowledge the thunderous applause. This was his moment of glory, his chance to demonstrate Regalian superiority to the entire Academy. And now, Marley announced, his voice carrying just a hint of what might charitably be called anticipation. Earth delegation, please proceed to the firing line. The applause died away into expectant silence. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the comic relief portion of the program. Amy Kowalski stepped forward calmly, her tiny weapon held loosely in one hand. "Oh, this should be good," Zorthak muttered to his fellow cadets. "I wonder if she will even be able to reach the first target barrier." Amy examined the range layout with professional interest, as if she were planning something more complex than the inevitable embarrassment of her entire species. Amy Kowalski raised her small weapon with the same casual precision that Zorthak might use to point at something mildly interesting across the room. There were no targeting computers, no energy build-up indicators, no dramatic charging sequences, no ominous humming sounds that would indicate serious destructive potential. She simply held the device steady, closed one eye, and squeezed what appeared to be a small lever. The sound that followed was underwhelming. A sharp crack, like someone stepping on a particularly brittle twig. Zorthak barely heard it over the ambient noise of the range systems. Several cadets actually laughed at the pathetic audio signature. "Is that it?" Blixara whispered, her tentacles rippling with amusement. Did something just break inside her little toy? But then something impossible happened. The first target barrier, 2 meters of reinforced battle steel that had required the Andromedan's stellar fire to penetrate, simply exploded. Not melted, not disintegrated, not dissolved at the molecular level. It exploded outward in a shower of twisted metal fragments, as if struck by an invisible fist moving at incomprehensible speed. The second barrier suffered the same fate before the debris from the first had even finished falling. Then the third, the fourth, the fifth. Zorthak's 6 eyes tracked something moving through the range at a velocity that his brain struggled to process. It was not energy. It was not plasma. It was not a gravitational wave or a molecular disruptor beam. It was something solid, something tiny, something that moved so fast it was punching holes through military-grade defenses like they were made of thin paper. The mobile drones that had survived his ion barrage simply ceased to exist when the projectile passed through their flight paths. Not destroyed, as erased. One moment they were sophisticated pieces of military hardware. The next moment they were expanding clouds of metallic debris. The armored bunker that Gromit's gravitational hammer had reduced to rubble. The tiny projectile carved through the wreckage without slowing down, sending chunks of collapsed fortifications spinning away like leaves in a hurricane. But the projectile was not finished. It struck the range's rear barrier, a wall of reinforced material, designed to stop anything the Academy's weapons could possibly throw at it. The barrier held for approximately 0.03 seconds before the projectile punched through it like it was not there at all. Emergency lighting began flashing as the projectile continued into the station's superstructure. Zorthak heard the distant sound of bulkheads being breached, of support struts being severed, of something impossibly small and fast carving a perfectly straight line through the most heavily armored military installation in known space. Then the alarm started. "Hull breach detected," announced the station's emergency systems in a voice that suggested this was not a routine occurrence. Section 7 Alpha through 12 Gamma. Projectile has exited the station. All personnel implement damage control protocols immediately. The silence that followed was so complete that Zorthak could hear his own 4-chambered heart beating. Every alien cadet in the chamber stood frozen, their various sensory organs locked onto Amy Kowalski, who was calmly checking her small weapon, as if she had just completed a routine maintenance procedure. "Excuse me," Commander Marley said in a voice that sounded like someone trying very hard not to panic. Did that projectile just exit the station entirely?" Amy nodded matter-of-factly. "Yes, sir. Standard 45 caliber round, full metal jacket, muzzle velocity approximately 400 meters per second. Should be somewhere in deep space by now, assuming it maintained trajectory after breaching your outer hull." Zorthak felt his world shift on its axis. 400 meters per second was nothing. That was slower than most civilian transport vehicles. How could something moving at such a pathetic velocity cause such catastrophic damage? "I do not understand," he stammered, his usual confidence cracking like ice in a solar flare. "Your projectile has no energy signature, no plasma containment, no gravitational manipulation. How did it?" Amy smiled. and for the first time since entering the demonstration hall, she looked genuinely pleased. Oh, it has energy. Kinetic energy. You see, the effectiveness of any projectile is determined by a simple equation. Kinetic energy equals 1/2 mass times velocity squared. But here's the interesting part. While energy weapons dissipate their power over time and distance, kinetic energy remains constant until the projectile impacts something solid. She held up her weapon for everyone to see. This fires a small piece of metal, we call it a bullet, using controlled chemical explosions to accelerate it down a rifled barrel. The bullet itself weighs about 15 grams and travels at roughly 400 meters per second when it leaves the barrel. Blixara's tentacles were writhing in confusion. But that is such a tiny amount of kinetic energy. Basic physics would suggest. Basic physics, Amy interrupted gently, is exactly the point. You see, while all of your weapons rely on exotic energy sources that require massive power systems and complex containment fields, humans decided to weaponize something much simpler. We weaponized momentum itself. She gestured toward the devastation her single shot had caused. That bullet maintained its velocity and direction regardless of what it encountered. Your battle steel barriers, your reinforced bunkers, your sophisticated defensive systems, they were all designed to absorb, deflect, or dissipate energy. They were not designed to stop 15 grams of metal moving in a perfectly straight line at constant velocity. Gromit's rocky features somehow managed to express bewilderment, but acceleration requires enormous power. Only during the acceleration phase, Amy explained patiently. The chemical explosive that propelled this bullet burned completely in less than 1/1000th of a second. After that, the projectile required no additional energy input whatsoever. It simply continued moving until something stopped it. Zorthak felt his four-armed superiority complex crumbling like a house built on quantum foundations. You mean humans have been using kinetic weapons this entire time? For several thousand years actually, Amy confirmed. We started with throwing rocks, moved on to arrows, then discovered gunpowder. This particular weapon represents about 6 centuries of refinement in the basic concept of make small object move very fast in straight line until it hits target. The implications were staggering. While every advanced civilization in the galaxy had been developing increasingly complex energy manipulation technologies, humans had been perfecting the art of making tiny pieces of metal move very quickly in straight lines. It was so primitive, so unsophisticated, so absolutely undeniably effective that it had just punched a hole through the most advanced military training facility in known space. The beauty of kinetic weapons, Amy continued, clearly enjoying the educational moment, is their simplicity. No power cells to drain, no exotic materials to maintain, no complex targeting computers to malfunction. Point, squeeze trigger, physics takes care of the rest. She looked around at the assembled alien cadets, all of whom were staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to horror to grudging admiration. Oh, and this was just a basic training round. We have bullets designed for armor penetration, explosive bullets, incendiary bullets, bullets that fragment on impact, bullets with depleted uranium cores for extra mass. Commander Marley interrupted before she could continue. Cadet Kowalski, I think we have seen quite enough for today. Please secure your weapon immediately. Amy obediently engaged what appeared to be some sort of safety mechanism. Of course, sir, though I should mention that this is actually considered a fairly small caliber by human standards. We have much larger versions for when we really need something to stop moving permanently. The silence that followed this revelation was so profound that even the station's emergency alarms seemed subdued. Within 30 minutes of Amy's demonstration, every senior officer on Kepler-7 had assembled in the Academy's main briefing chamber. Admiral Vashi, a distinguished cetacean whose aquatic tank dominated one wall of the room, communicated through bioluminescent patterns that flickered with barely controlled agitation. Admiral Drahorn, The Academy's chief tactical instructor paced the chamber with the nervous energy of someone whose entire understanding of warfare had just been fundamentally challenged. Let me ensure I understand the situation correctly. Admiral Vashi's translator rendered her light patterns into galactic standard. A single projectile, fired from what we classified as primitive human technology, has caused 17 hull breaches, destroyed 43 bulkheads, and carved a perfectly straight tunnel through our most heavily fortified training facility. Commander Marley consulted his damage assessment tablet with the expression of someone who still could not quite believe the readings. That is correct, Admiral. The projectile maintained its trajectory for approximately 2.7 kilometers before exiting the station entirely. Our tracking systems lost contact with it somewhere in the direction of the Vega system. Vega system. Blixara's tentacles writhed with alarm. That is my home system. What if that tiny death projectile hit something important? Amy, who had been invited to the emergency briefing as the cause of the current crisis, raised her hand politely. If I may, Admiral, the probability of the bullet striking anything in interstellar space is essentially zero. It will probably drift harmlessly through the void for millions of years. Admiral Drahorn stopped pacing long enough to fix Amy with a stare that could have melted battle steel. Cadet Kowalski, would you mind demonstrating the other ammunition types you mentioned earlier? For scientific purposes, of course. Amy reached into a small pouch on her belt and produced what appeared to be several identical copies of the projectile that had just rewritten the laws of military physics. Certainly, sir. This is standard ball ammunition. What I fired earlier. This is armor-piercing, designed with a hardened core for maximum penetration. She held up another round that looked essentially identical to Zorthak's increasingly horrified eyes. This is hollow point, which expands on impact to transfer maximum kinetic energy to the target. This is incendiary, which ignites upon impact. And this, she held up a round that looked slightly larger than the others. This is explosive. It detonates after penetration for maximum internal damage. Zorthak felt his four-chambered heart skip several beats. The humans had not just weaponized basic physics. They had weaponized it in multiple different ways. Each tiny projectile was engineered for specific tactical applications, turning the simple concept of make metal move fast into a comprehensive military doctrine. By the sacred crystals of Andromedus, whispered the musical-toned cadet, his harmonics trembling with newfound respect, humans have turned ammunition into a science. Admiral Vashi's bioluminescent display shifted to patterns that Zorthak had never seen before, but somehow understood to represent a mixture of professional admiration and existential terror. Commander Marley, I believe we need to make some immediate adjustments to our classification systems. Marley was already updating records on his portable console. Indeed, Admiral, removing humans from the primitive kinetic weapons category, and he paused, stylus hovering over the datapad. What classification would be appropriate for a species that has weaponized the fundamental laws of physics? I suggest terrifyingly creative, offered Gromit in his rumbling bass voice. Also possibly never underestimate again. Zorthak found himself nodding in agreement. His earlier arrogance completely evaporated like atmosphere through a hull breach. The humans had not failed to understand advanced military technology. They had taken a completely different approach to the same problem. While every other species had been trying to generate more energy, more exotic effects, more complex targeting systems, humans had been perfecting the art of making small objects move very, very efficiently. Cadet Kowalski, Admiral Drahorn announced officially, you have achieved the highest destructive efficiency rating in Academy history. Single projectile, minimal energy expenditure, maximum tactical effectiveness. Furthermore, your weapon requires no exotic materials, no complex power systems, and can apparently be manufactured using relatively simple industrial processes. Amy accepted the recognition with the same calm professionalism she had shown throughout the entire demonstration. Thank you, Admiral. Though I should mention that what I demonstrated today represents fairly basic human military technology. We have much more advanced applications of kinetic weapons principles. The chamber fell silent again as every alien mind present tried to process the implications of that statement. More advanced, Zorthak squeaked, his voice cracking like a molting adolescent's. Oh yes, Amy replied cheerfully. Rifles that can accurately engage targets at ranges exceeding 2 kilometers. Machine guns that can fire hundreds of rounds per minute. Artillery that can deliver kinetic projectiles across entire continents. Railguns that use electromagnetic acceleration to achieve velocities that, well, let's just say they make this little demonstration look like a gentle tap. Admiral Vashi's luminescent display shifted to what could only be described as the bioluminescent equivalent of putting one's head in one's hands. Commander Marley, please update our records immediately. Humans are to be reclassified as a Tier 1 military threat effective immediately. Also, added Admiral Drahorn with the tone of someone who had learned several important lessons today. Send a priority message to the Galactic Defense Council. They need to know that we have been drastically underestimating human military capabilities. Zorthak looked around at his fellow cadets, all of whom were staring at Amy with expressions of newfound respect mixed with healthy terror. The human who had walked into their demonstration hall with what they had assumed was a primitive toy, had just single-handedly rewritten the Academy's understanding of effective military technology, and she was smiling. The days following what Academy historians would later record as the Great Kinetic Revelation brought changes that no one could have predicted. The demonstration hall, once filled with mocking laughter, now echoed with respectful whispers whenever Amy Kowalski passed through. Alien cadets who had previously dismissed human technology now studied ballistics tables with the intensity of religious scholars examining sacred texts. Zorthak, his four-armed pride thoroughly demolished, approached Amy during the evening meal period with an expression that could only be described as humble desperation. "Cadet Kowalski," he began, his voice lacking any trace of its former arrogance, "would it be possible for you to teach me about human weapons principles? I find myself suddenly very interested in understanding kinetic energy applications." Amy looked up from her meal, on something called a sandwich, that seemed to consist of various edible substances compressed between two pieces of processed grain, and smiled with genuine warmth. "Of course, Zorthak, though I should warn you, human military philosophy tends to be fairly simple. We believe in making things that work reliably, can be maintained easily, and accomplish their intended purpose with maximum efficiency and minimum complexity." Around them, representatives from dozens of species listened intently to every word. Blixara was taking notes with 3 tentacles simultaneously. Gromit had activated his internal recording systems. Even the peaceful plant beings from Kepler 22 beam were leaning in with obvious interest. "The key," Amy continued, apparently unaware of her growing audience, "is understanding that the most elegant solution is usually the simplest one. Why build a weapon that requires exotic matter and complex power systems when you can achieve the same result by making a small piece of metal move very fast?" Within weeks, the Galactic Defense Council was flooded with requests from member species seeking human military advisors. The Academy's curriculum was completely restructured to include courses in kinetic weapons theory, ballistic mathematics, and something called applied physics for maximum destructive efficiency. And somewhere in the depths of space, a single 45 caliber bullet continued its journey toward the Vega system, carrying with it the message that the galaxy had finally learned an important lesson: never underestimate the species that turned throwing rocks into a science. After all, humans were the only race in known space who looked at the fundamental forces of the universe and said, "You know what? We can weaponize that."